Observe the external environment through the window and you will discern that the vicissitudes of life are as unpredictable as the weather. Our trajectory intersects with turbulent whirlwinds of change, forcing us to navigate the treacherous waters of uncertainty. Nevertheless, even in the darkest recesses of our existence, we find the fortitude to take another step. The following is a narrative account of an individual whose life has been shaped by the actions of those who have sought to challenge his resilience since his formative years. From an early age, I had aspired to establish my own modest yet lucrative enterprise, to marry a woman who would bear me at least 3 children, 2 boys and 1 girl, and to achieve a life defined by these goals. As is often the case, life presents us with challenges that are not aligned with our expectations. One evening, I witnessed the collapse of my aspirations when I observed my wife and her partner in the kitchen, seeking an audience with me. I am Jeffrey Mason, and I have long held the ambition of establishing my own business. At that moment, the trajectory of my aspirations shifted. My father provided me with unwavering support, instilling in me a belief in my abilities that I had not yet developed myself. From an early age, I recall sitting with my father in our modest kitchen, surrounded by the aromas of freshly baked bread and freshly brewed coffee. He would regale me with tales of his youth, recounting his travels and experiences. I discovered different cultures through food and drinks, which inspired me to dream about my own cafe. I imagined a place where people could gather together, enjoying delicious food and a sense of belonging. After graduating from college, I was armed with knowledge and endless enthusiasm. I decided it was time to turn my dream into reality. My father was my main assistant and mentor on this path. He not only gave me the initial capital accumulated over years of his labor but also something much more valuable: confidence in myself and belief in success. The first months were incredibly difficult. I worked without days off, starting early in the morning and finishing late at night despite the fatigue. I worked from morning to night, experiencing an incredible excitement from doing something important and something of my own. Our efforts began to bear fruit, and as soon as the cafe started making a profit, my father left me, stating that I would henceforth have to manage everything independently. 1 year later, the cafe had reached a modest but stable income, and I felt that I could breathe a little and allow myself not only to work but also to live. It was at that moment that Jane entered my life. We met completely by chance on one of those rare days when I decided to take a break and go for a walk in the park nearby. I remember it well. We reached a modest but stable income, which allowed me to take a breath and embrace not only work but also a more balanced lifestyle. It was at this juncture that Jane entered my life. We met fortuitously on one of those rare occasions when I opted to take a respite and embark on a stroll in the nearby park. I distinctly recall on that day, as if it were yesterday, I observed a bright sun, a gentle breeze, and an unexpected meeting that had a profound impact on my life. Jane was seated on a bench, absorbed in a book. As I passed by, the wind suddenly played a prank, tearing a page from her book. I hastened to assist her in retrieving it. A leaf, which had apparently been dislodged from a nearby tree, provided the impetus for our initial interaction. She expressed her gratitude and we proceeded to engage in a discussion about literature, our preferred genres, and the value of taking occasional respites to appreciate the present moment. I was informed that she was a college student pursuing a degree in law. Her intellectual capabilities and eloquence immediately captured my attention. I was aware that we had spent the entire evening together walking through the park and sharing stories from our lives. From that day on, our friendship only grew stronger. We began to spend more and more time together, and I soon realized that I could not imagine my life without Jane. She not only supported me in everything, but she also provided me with guidance and encouragement. The experience at the cafe was related to the experience of the cafe itself, but it also inspired me to be a better person. I loved her for her kindness, intelligence, and ability to see in me what I could not see in myself. I took care of her, and eventually, after a couple of months, I proposed to her in my own cafe. Since I did not have much money, we decided to have a wedding, and I was confident that I would be able to repay the debts in the near future, buoyed by the success of our cafe and the stability it brought us. A pivotal moment in our relationship occurred and Jane received a job offer she found irresistible. Roger Novak, a young and ambitious lawyer with whom we were acquainted through mutual connections, proposed that she become his assistant. At the time, Roger was just beginning his practice and was seeking talented individuals to build a successful team. She was enthusiastic about the opportunity, believing it would be a significant step towards personal and professional growth. However, despite the fact that our business was performing adequately and that Jane did not require employment, she was motivated to contribute to the family budget and pursue a new direction. I endorsed her decision, as I observed her enthusiasm for embracing this challenge. Roger Novak proved to be a remarkable individual. He was not only intelligent and driven, but also possessed a charismatic quality that attracted people. In the initial months of Jane's employment, she frequently shared her achievements and the insights she was gaining. The position demanded significant time commitment, yet she appeared content and energetic. It was encouraging to observe her enthusiasm for new ideas and tasks that Roger assigned her. I questioned whether she was investing an excessive amount of time at work, but I recognized that it was crucial for her. Collaborating with Roger provided her with a sense of fulfillment and achievement, and I was reluctant to impede this. Jane and I have consistently functioned as a cohesive unit, and I was acutely aware of the necessity to offer each other assistance in our endeavors. Consequently, despite my initial reservations about her new position, I endeavored to serve as a source of stability and guidance for her. Ultimately, our capacity to offer support and inspiration to one another only reinforced the strength of our bond. I began to observe changes that initially appeared inconsequential. Jane was spending progressively less time at home. I came to understand that the time and energy that could have been spent together on activities such as sexual intercourse, watching movies, going for walks, and so on was instead devoted to other pursuits. The evenings when we used to sit down for dinner discussing our day and sharing plans for the future became increasingly rare. Jane often came home late, tired, and the only thing she wanted was to be in silence. I attempted to demonstrate my support by cooking dinner and offering assistance around the house, but an invisible distance grew between us, which only increased over time. Discussions about the future and our shared dreams were replaced by brief messages about the necessity of working late or unexpected business meetings. Attempts to discuss the impact of Jane's work on our shared evenings often resulted in her emphasizing the significance of her professional responsibilities. I endeavored to comprehend and accommodate this perspective, yet I began to experience feelings of resentment and isolation. Additionally, I observed a shift in Jane's approach to discussing her work. Previously, she had been forthcoming and detailed in her descriptions, but now her narratives became more general and unclear. At times, it appeared that she was avoiding conversations about her work, particularly when I inquired about her interactions with Roger. On one occasion when Jane returned home late, I decided to address this issue. I inquired as to whether she was dedicating an excessive amount of time to her occupation. I also questioned whether we should attempt to establish a more harmonious equilibrium between her professional and personal lives. Jane's response was somewhat unexpected. She asserted that her work was a conduit for personal growth and that I should demonstrate greater understanding. While her rationale was logical, her tone as time progressed, I perceived a growing distance between us. Jane's superior, a prominent lawyer, had achieved remarkable success, becoming the most accomplished in our city. He had purchased a house and drove an expensive Jeep. I must admit that I even envied him because I was constrained in my own business and did not experience the growth I had previously. I was profoundly lonely. Jane's support, who seemed to have distanced herself from me, I attempted to initiate a discussion about the prospect of having children, operating under the assumption that the addition of a child and the formation of a family would serve as a source of motivation for personal growth. However, Jane stated that she was not inclined to hasten the process. The hours passed, and it became an ordinary day. I concluded my business at the cafe later than usual. Having remained at the establishment to converse with the final few patrons, with whom I had fostered a close rapport over the years, on my return journey, I reflected on the manner in which I might propose a weekend together with Jane, with a view to fostering a closer bond. As I approached our residence, I observed that the interior was illuminated, which struck me as unusual. The living room was the usual setting for their interactions. Jane typically returned home late, rarely waiting for me downstairs. I sensed a certain anticipation in the air as I unlocked the door and entered the kitchen. Seated at the glass table was Jane. Her expression was serious and somewhat tired, but what surprised me most was the presence of a third person, Roger Novak. He sat seated opposite her. He appeared entirely at ease, as if his presence were entirely natural. "We need to talk," Jane began, her tone calm but with an underlying certainty that alarmed me. Roger nodded at me in greeting but said nothing. Jane continued, and each word seemed to rain down upon me like icy rain. She spoke about how our relationship. She stated that her feelings had undergone a transformation, that she was adrift between the demands of her professional and domestic lives, and that she had found solace and understanding in Roger. She did not explicitly mention the term affair, yet her discourse was imbued with a connotation of illicit intimacy. Then, as if from a distance, I heard her request for a divorce, presented on the table in front of me in a neat stack of papers. In that moment, I experienced a sense of immobility, as if the world around me had frozen. I was unable to process the reality of the situation. My immediate reaction was to reject her words and suggest that we could salvage the relationship. However, Jane's demeanor was unwavering, and Roger's presence conveyed a strong message. Roger intervened, his voice calm, and he was confident and offered no apologies. He did not attempt to mitigate the impact of his words. Instead, he spoke of the practical aspects, stating that this would be better for all of them. His words conveyed a sense of detachment and calculation, and there was no indication of regret in his eyes. I sat, unable to rise, attempting to comprehend how my life and my aspirations were unraveling. In that moment, a multitude of questions swirled in my mind, yet I was unable to verbalize a single word. Jane requested that I sign the documents, yet I was paralyzed by an overwhelming sense of resistance. An inner turmoil arose, a desperate rejection of this reality. I was finally able to articulate my refusal when I mustered the strength to speak. Despite my internal turmoil, I attempted to maintain composure, although a tempestuous tumult raged within. Jane regarded me with a gaze that betrayed a hint of regret, yet her resolve remained unwavering. "Jeffrey, I implore you to comprehend that this is the optimal resolution for us both," she gently intoned, attempting to persuade me. However, how could I possibly fathom, how could I possibly concur with the erasure of our shared life memories? The dreams could be erased with a single stroke of the pen. Roger stood up, his facial expression impassive. I was aware that he was not amenable to negotiation and was prepared to pursue the matter to its conclusion. I reiterated my intention to withhold my signature, attempting to establish eye contact with Roger in order to ascertain whether he might be amenable to compromise. However, his demeanor was unyielding, reflecting a cold and calculating disposition. It became evident that we would have to pursue the matter through the courts. Roger Cly, in a gesture that indicated his awareness of the value of the business in question, proceeded to fold the documents and rise from the table. He then made his way towards Jane, who stood and departed with him. I observed from the window as they traversed the street and entered Roger's vehicle, leaving me in solitude the following morning. The evening was distressing. I awoke with a heavy heart, having experienced a restless, fitful night's sleep, during which I was plagued by anxious thoughts about the future. I promptly sought legal counsel, recognizing the need for an objective assessment of my situation and potential courses of action. I recalled Mr. Osborne, an experienced lawyer. I contacted Mr. Osborne, an attorney specializing in family law, and scheduled an appointment for the same day. Upon my arrival, Mr. Osborne greeted me in his office with a professional smile. However, his expression soon turned serious as I began to share my situation. He listened attentively, interrupting me only to clarify details after I finished. He then paused for a moment as if weighing his words. "Jeffrey," he began, "your situation is complicated, but not hopeless." He then proceeded to outline the steps we would need to take to protect my interests. First, we would need to gather evidence that the divorce was not initiated due to my fault. This would help protect my interests. I nodded in understanding, recognizing that the process would not be straightforward. The prospect of gathering evidence against Jane was daunting. Mr. Osborne proposed the hiring of a private detective, Ivy, who could assist in this endeavor. He explained that it was standard practice in such cases and that it was essential to be fully prepared for the court proceedings. Upon exiting Mr. Osborne's office, I experienced a sense of reassurance. I obtained the detective's contact information but chose to contact him at a later time, necessitating a period of reflection following the meeting with Mr. Osborne. In the evening, I proceeded to a cafe, where I spent the remainder of my typical workday. I subsequently drove to my unoccupied residence and had just parked the vehicle when I was approached by an individual. As I approached the door, I observed a figure standing in the shadow on my porch. My heart rate accelerated as I recognized the individual as Roger Novak. His presence at such an unexpected hour was not anticipated. "We need to talk, Jeffrey," he stated, emerging from the darkness. His voice was calm, yet there was an underlying threat in his tone. I paused, prepared for confrontation. "There is no basis for confrontation. Roger, there is nothing more to discuss. All matters will be settled in court," I replied firmly, attempting to conceal my agitation. Roger advanced, his gaze now stern and unyielding. "You are making a grave misjudgment by refusing to sign those documents, Jeffrey. It could have dire consequences for you. I was warned that my decision would not be swayed by threats. I will fight for what I believe is right." I felt my resolve strengthen in the face of his threats. Roger smirked, but there was no warmth in his smile. "We'll see what you'll say when all this is over, Jeffrey. You are in the wrong. I had long been aware that Jane would ultimately terminate her relationship with you. She had discussed your thriving cafe and the mounting debts you were accruing. You were no longer a necessity in her life." He continued, "You are nothing but a clown. What are you fighting for?" These words struck me profoundly, and I was unable to contain my emotions. I responded by stating, "I am fighting for my honor." I then struck Roger with a forceful blow to the face. This action caused him to stagger back and cover his face with his hands. I then delivered a second blow directly to his lower abdomen, causing him to double over. "Stop!" Roger began to shout. I delivered the third blow with the words, "Do not dare approach my residence again." Roger hastily ran to his vehicle. I was shocked by the realization that Roger had taken my wife, most likely engaged in sexual intercourse with her, and still dared to threaten me was a significant turning point. I had always been calm, but now it felt as if someone else had possessed me. The following morning, I contacted a private detective and scheduled a meeting with him in his office for lunchtime that same day. He introduced himself as Mr. Clark, a middle-aged man with a piercing gaze and a business. The man in question was advanced in age and possessed a piercing gaze, along with a demeanor that suggested a background in business. I informed him of the circumstances surrounding my situation, attempting to maintain an objective and detailed account. Mr. Clark listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions. He suggested that we begin by observing Mr. Novak and attempting to gather information about his interactions with my wife. After I had finished, he stated that this would help us obtain evidence that could be used in court. I nodded in agreement with his plan and we proceeded to discuss the details, including potential risks. The financial implications of engaging Mr. Clark's services were significant, yet I recognized that the potential consequences of failing to act were even more grave. Consequently, I agreed to proceed without reservation. "I will endeavor to provide the utmost assistance to you, Mr. Mason, and endeavor to gather material in the coming days." As we concluded our meeting, Mr. Clark reassured me that I had made the right decision. However, as I returned home, I reflected on how my life had become akin to a detective novel, where every step could potentially lead to unforeseen outcomes. Nevertheless, I was prepared to do whatever it took to protect my interests. What was dear to me, even if it meant playing by rules I did not like. A few days after hiring Mr. Clark, my life fell into a rhythm of waiting and intention. Every day, I opened the cafe, trying to focus on work, but my thoughts constantly returned to the possible outcomes of the detective's investigation. I tried to remain strong, but internal anxiety gave me no peace. It was during these days when I felt most vulnerable that what I least expected happened. One day while I was working, in the cafe, Roger Novak approached me. He was not alone, a man who appeared to be his bodyguard was standing next to him. Seeing Roger in my cafe, especially after our last conversation, instantly filled the atmosphere with tension. "We need to talk," Jeffrey said in a quiet place. Roger began, his voice sounding calm but determination evident in his eyes. I felt anger rising within me. "I've already told you, Roger. We're done talking. Everything will be resolved in court." I replied, trying to in response. He merely smirked and then his gaze hardened. He then inquired as to whether I truly believed I could emerge victorious. He informed me that I was being offered a final opportunity to avoid public disgrace. I rejected his offer, feeling my patience snap. He then proceeded to issue a series of threats, which I was not intimidated by. I instructed him to leave my premises. At that moment, he lunged at me, knocking me to the ground and beginning to beat me. He then proceeded to verbally assault me, stating that I was a pup who thought I could beat him and get away with it unpunished. He was like a dog that had broken off its leash, pounding on me for approximately 40 seconds. I was barely able to comprehend what was happening when I attempted to resist the thug he had brought to my cafe. He prevented me from doing so, and I was fortunate that a patrol car was parked near my cafe and the police responded promptly, coming to my aid and detaining the perpetrator. At the police station, I was the victim, while Roger attempted to claim that I was the first to attack him. However, witness testimony and camera footage indicated otherwise. I was subsequently released, while Roger was detained at the station and prohibited from approaching me. Several days later, Mr. Clark contacted me, stating that he had important information. We met in a quiet cafe, away from prying eyes, where he produced several photographs and documents from his briefcase, which he claimed could be pivotal in the case. Mr. Clark presented evidence against Roger Novak, demonstrating his wrongful actions toward me and Jane. The photos captured informal meetings between Jane and Roger, which, while not direct proof of infidelity, supported my suspicion and could be used to support my case of marriage breakdown due to external interference. Furthermore, Mr. Clark gathered evidence that Roger used his influence to pressure me and my business activities, which could be interpreted as an attempt to harm my well-being. Mr. Clark informed me that, in his professional opinion, the documents I was reviewing could serve as pivotal evidence in my case. He suggested that they could prove that Mr. Novak's actions were aimed at destroying my marriage and threatening my business. I proceeded to review the materials provided, feeling a surge of strength and confidence. Finally, I had something that could help me fight for justice. I thanked Mr. Clark for his work and requested that he continue monitoring Roger, hoping to gather even more evidence. As the trial date drew near, I was consumed by the preparation of evidence of Novak's guilt. I was disappointed that Jane did not contact me during this period, as I had hoped to maintain communication. However, I came to realize that I had already lost her as a contact as the hearing date approached. I was determined to work in the cafe, which provided me with both income and a refuge from personal issues. Nevertheless, I knew that I could not allow my personal life to affect my professional life, as we had discussed previously. Mr. Clark continued to provide me with additional evidence and information that could be used in court since Jane and I were still legally married. Photographs of her kissing and another man would be significant proof of her infidelity on the eve of the trial. I felt emotionally and physically exhausted. Gathering evidence and engaging in endless discussions with Mr. Osborne took a toll on me, as did my internal struggle with my own feelings. However, I knew I couldn't afford to break down. A great deal was at stake, and I was determined to see this through to the end regardless of the outcome. The day of the court hearing arrived faster than I expected, and I felt I was simultaneously prepared and utterly unprepared for what was to come. Mr. Osborne assured me that we had done everything possible to prepare for this day. He detailed the process of the trial and what arguments would be presented in defense of my position. Upon arriving at the courthouse, I was engulfed by a mix of excitement and tension. The corridors buzzed with legal activity, yet for me, the world seemed to pause in anticipation. In the courtroom, I saw Jane and Roger for the first time in several months. Jane looked calm, which only added to my nervousness. Roger, on the other hand, appeared as the hearing commenced. I attempted to concentrate on the words uttered by the presiding judge and the attorneys. Mr. Osborne articulated our arguments with clarity, emphasizing Roger's culpable actions and their ramifications on my personal and professional life. Additionally, he highlighted the infidelity of my wife during our marriage. He presented evidence, including photographs and testimonies, to substantiate our stance. However, when it was Jane's attorney's turn to speak, I experienced a surge of anxiety. He presented their account of events, attempting to portray Jane in the most favorable light and justify her actions. The decision to seek a divorce. Jane alleged that I had resorted to physical force against her and that she had fled to her employer. Despite my attempts to remain calm, it was challenging to listen as they sought to justify actions that had caused me significant distress. I was simply eager to obtain a divorce and move on from this painful experience. The days spent awaiting the court's decision seemed to stretch on endlessly, with each phone call intensifying my anticipation of news. However, time passed with no updates from Mr. Osborne. My life was momentarily paused in anticipation, and I sought ways to occupy my time. I was preoccupied with work at the cafe to distract myself from the obsessive thoughts about the trial, which was finally underway on one of the clear autumn days when the leaves had already started to turn yellow and fall. A call came through. It was Mr. Clark. His voice sounded firm and calm as always, but I immediately felt that he was bearing important news. "The court has made its decision. Jeffrey," he began, and my heart started beating faster. "The court has found our side's arguments to be valid. Your marriage to Jane will be dissolved at your request on the grounds of the evidence we provided of her guilt and the—" I froze, attempting to retain every detail of the proceedings, fearful of missing something crucial. "What about Roger?" I inquired, my voice barely audible. "As for Mr. Novak, the court has ruled in your favor. He will be issued a restraining order against contacting you and will also be required to pay you compensation for emotional distress and cover the legal costs. The compensation will be substantial." Mr. Osborne continued, his words imparting a sense of immense relief, accompanied by a bittersweet realization that this process had definitively put an end to the situation. The termination of my relationship with Jane was a welcome outcome, as it represented a triumph of justice. "I am grateful to you, Mr. Osborne, for your assistance. I would not have been able to navigate this situation without your guidance. Jeffrey, if you have further inquiries or require additional assistance, I am available to provide support." My wife's decision to bring her lover into our home and insist on an amicable divorce ultimately led to the dissolution of our marriage. Not only did she betray me, but she also slandered me, which left her indebted to me instead. As a result of the incident in the cafe where the lawyer attacked me, he lost his position and was no longer allowed to practice his profession. I am unsure of the current circumstances of my former spouse and her partner. At the time, I perceived my circumstances to be more favorable than those of Rogers. I observed him driving a less expensive foreign vehicle in lieu of his Jeep, which appeared to be in a state of disrepair. However, I was not concerned with his personal choices. My primary objective was to stabilize my own life. I considered the sale of our shared residence to be an essential first step in this process. I had initially anticipated that the real estate market might present certain challenges, but it proved to be more favorable than I had expected. I was able to find a suitable buyer for the property relatively quickly. The funds from the house sale provided me with financial freedom and the opportunity to re-examine my life from a new perspective. I decided that the first thing I would do was update my car, which had served me faithfully for many years. However, most importantly, I decided to invest in the development of my cafe. This place became not just a business for me but also a part of my soul, a place where I found solace in the hardest times. I realized that I desired to see it flourish, to become even more cozy and welcoming, a place where people would come for warmth and comfort. As the cafe was rejuvenated, I felt rejuvenated as well. I had invested so much effort and soul into this place that I saw my life in a new light. Every new guest in the cafe and every positive review reminded me that even in the darkest times, it is possible to find light and hope for the better with each day. I became more aware that the processes of evaluation and change are an inherent aspect of life. They can be painful and frightening, yet simultaneously offer the potential for growth and new beginnings. My cafe became a symbol of such rebirth, a place where one can leave behind the difficulties of the past and find hope for a brighter future. I began to interact with new individuals whose company brought me joy and inspiration. Each cafe visitor brought their own story, and I found pleasure in listening to them. In listening to their narratives, these encounters prompted me to recognize that life is replete with unexpected occurrences and that even during periods of adversity, there are potential sources of illumination. With this in mind, I envisioned a future brimming with prospects. I aspired to expand my business by opening new cafe locations in other parts of the city and even contemplated the creation of my own product line. My ambitions and dreams, which previously seemed unattainable, now appeared within reach. I was aware that new challenges would arise, but I was also confident in my ability to overcome them. Every obstacle serves to strengthen us, and every failure teaches us to appreciate our victories. The narrative powerfully illustrates the intricacies of human relationships and our capacity to persevere through adversity. It reminds us that even in the darkest moments, we can find the strength and inspiration for change and growth. The second narrative revolves around the theme of assertiveness. Since college, I have consistently found myself embroiled in conflicts and disputes. I am adept at defending my position and point of view, which has instilled in me a sense of confidence and strategic thinking. However, I never anticipated that these very skills would prove invaluable during my divorce from my unfaithful wife. My name is Stephen, and Kathleen is my wife, with whom I have been in a relationship for 15 years. During this period, we have had 2 children, a 7-year-old boy and a 15-year-old girl. I have a son, aged 7, and a daughter, aged 15. I consider myself an assertive and strict man, but this is only in the context of interactions with strangers. In my family, I am warm and nurturing, and I only raise my voice in rare cases, solely for educational purposes. I maintain a physically fit and toned body through regular gym attendance. My wife, Kathleen, is a petite brunette with brown eyes. She also prioritizes regular self-care, and has a toned figure, attractive breasts, and an equally delicate and smooth body. Despite initial concerns that childbirth would result in a loss of her slim physique, I believe she has only improved. However, I am unsure if this is a positive development, as it is not clear to me whether it is beneficial or detrimental. Her attractive appearance has attracted the attention of numerous men, which has caused me some frustration. I have expressed my displeasure with Kathleen on several occasions when I discovered her engaging in conversation with a male individual. I am extremely jealous and unsure of how to address this issue. If a man stands next to my wife for more than a minute, I experience a strong physical reaction. It is not that I do not trust Kathleen, it is simply a matter of my nature. Over the years, I have struggled to subdue the inner beast of anger, though I cannot say that I have been wholly successful. However, I have not given up during our 15 years together. Kathleen has only encountered my bouts of jealousy on a few occasions. She was aware of my capacity for violence, and this knowledge proved useful when some bold individuals attempted to compel her to dance on the dance floor in my absence, despite my instructions to the contrary. Despite her refusals, they proceeded to act in an aggressive manner, even forcibly removing her from the dance floor. Upon my return to the club with a friend, I immediately confronted one of the individuals involved, questioning his audacity in attempting to intimidate Kathleen. I swiftly intervened, defending her and asserting my authority. I physically confronted the individual, striking him with a forceful blow to the head, effectively deterring any further attempts at intimidation. Subsequently, C and I resolved to depart. I came to recognize that I could not tolerate any form of disrespect. This incident prompted me to question why Kathleen had permitted it to occur, despite my suspicions. She asserted that she was unable to take action and that the individuals in question were forcing her to comply. However, I was inclined to believe her, and my feelings towards her remained unchanged. In recent times, numerous unusual developments have occurred in our lives with the advent of a new superior at Kathleen's workplace. Her appearance has undergone a notable transformation, and our intimate relationship has also undergone changes. Kathleen's behavior suddenly improved. She began spending more time on her phone, constantly texting someone and claiming that she was communicating with friends. She also started having important business meetings, mostly in the evenings. These factors began to ignite a strong feeling of jealousy in me. I was unable to control my jealousy, but I also understood that confronting them directly was a foolish idea. Therefore, I resorted to a more cunning way of finding out the truth. I questioned whether my suspicions were baseless. I decided to engage the services of a private detective, instructing him to keep me informed only after the investigation was concluded. 3 months later, I received a report that confirmed my worst fears. I was disconcerted as I reviewed the video, audio, and photographic evidence. I immediately contacted a lawyer, indicating that it was time to initiate a new chapter in our life. I was compelled to prepare for this next step. The divorce papers were to be served by Wednesday noon. My plan was to surprise them at a meeting on Thursday evening while they thought I was out of town. I had special plans for this couple, and I was astonished that Kathleen could even assume I would let this slide. Kathleen knew me better than anyone else, recognizing my intuition, determination, and ability to be relentless. She saw how I ruthlessly took charge of the company and confidently dealt with the competitors in question had now assumed control of a major transportation company and were earning the respect of drivers, whom I had always treated fairly. I was confident in their support. I provided Kathleen with everything she needed and treated her like royalty, which she was well aware of. She told all her friends and relatives about my care. Nevertheless, the question remained, why did she risk everything for a fleeting affair with her boss? My wife seemed to think I was on a business trip. Based on her conversation with her boss about being available that evening, I was able to ascertain that she would be free to receive messages and calls from him. This information, along with the knowledge that she had been monitoring my communications, only served to reinforce my suspicions. I was able to ascertain the name of the restaurant and the time at which they had arranged to meet. My determination and sense of betrayal intensified after seeing how she behaved and realizing the extent of her boss's audacity. My plan was to wait until they let their guard down and I then resolved to make an abrupt appearance with the divorce papers. I was aware that Kathleen would not desire a divorce, given her affection for me and our children. However, I also recognized that my actions would irreversibly alter her life at that moment. I was imbued with a sense of purpose and determination. My sole intention was to inflict upon her at least a fraction of the pain she had caused me. It is conceivable that some might argue for forgiveness and the dissolution of grievances, particularly in light of our children, who had been a part of our 15-year marriage. Despite a 15-year marriage, I found myself unable to simply let go of the situation. I was determined to prevent another man from becoming close to my wife. I aimed to maintain her loyalty as a partner, despite my love for her and the pain I was experiencing. I came to realize that I could never again see or touch her in the same way as before. I found myself in a state of passive observation and anticipation. I needed to discern the optimal moment to act. On a Thursday evening, I observed them entering a restaurant and ordering drinks. I was prepared, greeting the hostess with a smile as I exited the vehicle and entered the restaurant. I restrained my anger and began to act in accordance with the plan. My wife was seated at the table in a revealing cocktail dress that accentuated her cleavage, which was highly distressing to me. This behavior was particularly perplexing given that she never wore such attire in my presence. I was perplexed and distressed by her actions. What could have motivated her to act in such a manner? It appeared as though she was attempting to appear seductive for her companion, which only served to intensify my anger. As I approached their table, I observed how deeply engaged they were with one another, creating an endearing and adorable scene. It was only after I pulled out a chair to sit at their table that they became aware of my presence. Kathleen's gaze was clouded with a mix of fear and guilt, which I had not previously observed. I found myself in an unfamiliar situation while her boss just looked at me with dissatisfaction, apparently not realizing who I was. I began cheerfully, "Hello Kathleen, how is your date going?" I asked with a smile, adding, "What brings you here? I thought you wouldn't be around." She hesitated, trying to find the right words. To find the appropriate words, I began to speak. "Richard invited me to dinner to discuss changes in the organization." "Join us," she responded softly, maintaining her composure. She then stood up just as my order arrived, ignoring her previous words. I proposed a toast, suggesting that we drink to an exciting evening. I then turned to Richard and inquired about the nature of his marriage. "Richard, our marriage is built on honesty and trust." "Are you married?" "Indeed, Stephen. I have been married for 20 years, and I highly value my marriage. I concur with your assertion that honesty and trust are the cornerstones of any marriage." He responded without a hint of doubt. Kathleen corroborated that trust and honesty are essential to our happiness, despite the evident business nature of the meeting. I continued, "As you can see, Richard, our marriage is strong, demonstrating care for Kathleen and her fidelity." The attendees attempted to reinstate a professional atmosphere. I inquired as to the duration of their acquaintance. Kathleen endeavored to assume control of the situation, assuring that it was a purely business meeting. Her colleagues corroborated this, emphasizing the professional boundaries of the meeting and offering apologies for any potential misunderstanding regarding the nature of the meeting. In the softly lit shadow of the restaurant, I began with an apology, attempting to convey in my voice that I was sorry, but it seemed to me that you had never invited my wife on dates. This meeting was strictly business, as you had previously stated, Richard. He nodded, confirming that the meeting with Kathleen was professional in nature. There is no romantic or sexual interest between us, and I was tempted to confront him immediately and forcefully. However, I restrained myself, recognizing the need to gather more information. Kathleen rushed to reassure me, stating that the matter was purely professional. She emphasized that she would never engage in any romantic or sexual relationship with another individual, particularly not with her boss. Her words seemed sincere, but I remained uncertain. Despite my best efforts to maintain a sense of objectivity, I found myself overcome with a sense of jealousy, particularly when I observed Kathleen in a glittering dress, accompanied by an attractive man. I attempted to convey the reasons behind my emotional state, hoping to gain some understanding. In response, Richard, who had been affectionately petting Kathleen's cat, attempted to offer comfort. However, his actions seemed to be driven by a desire to soothe me, not Kathleen. As he touched my wife, I felt a surge of entitlement, prompting me to consider inflicting physical harm upon him. The atmosphere of our conversation shifted abruptly when I signaled. A stranger approached our table at the bar and handed me a folder with photos. He then quickly disappeared, spreading the photos on the table. I turned to Kathleen with sadness in my voice. "Kathleen, I have always loved you with all my heart," I said, "but now, with these proofs before me, my heart is broken." I spoke with a hint of sarcasm. Kathleen froze, seeing the photos, her eyes widening in horror. Richard started. I demanded explanations, but he simply asked me to be quiet, continuing to flip through the photos. I found myself making ironic remarks, noting that Kathleen appeared beautiful and that Richard seemed thrilled. I considered this the most successful photo, as it captured their expressions and the enjoyment they derived from the process. Richard, I observed, seemed particularly fond of my wife. He then proceeded to reveal the dramatic scene. The clandestine connections and ardent passions that lurked beneath the facade of business relations in the restaurant reached a crescendo. Kathleen was unable to contain her emotions any longer and implored me to cease, noting that the attention of those in our vicinity was fixed upon our table. I attempted to speak in a more subdued manner, striving to avoid attracting undue attention in such a public setting, despite feeling somewhat uneasy myself. Given the circumstances, it was evident that this discussion could not continue in such an atmosphere. She then proceeded to suggest a potential solution. I regarded her with mild surprise and replied, "So you intend to persist in denying the truth, but allow me to present you with evidence to the contrary." I then proceeded to lay out the evidence I had gathered, which included hours of video recordings, text messages, emails, and photographs. I had not anticipated this level of deceit. The emotional distress caused by this situation has been significant, and the resources invested in gathering evidence were considerable. I maintained eye contact with her as I presented the divorce papers. "The dissolution of the marriage is a direct result of your infidelity, which has irreparably damaged our relationship and destroyed my capacity to love you. If you do not sign these papers, the consequences will be severe. The documents are to be signed today. It is imperative that the truth be revealed, as our children have a right to know who their mother truly is." Kathleen was in tears, and her lover appeared bewildered. She attempted to plead with me, offering typical excuses, but I remained unyielding. "Stephen, I love you. Please give me another chance," she said, her voice quavering. "I will be back," I replied, rising from the table. "I return these papers to be signed. Otherwise, I guarantee that the chaos I can bring into your life that day will be beyond your comprehension." As I left, leaving Kathleen in tears and her heart in ruins, it was evident to me that Richard was prepared to do anything to obtain her signature. He was eager to save himself at any cost while I was away. The speed of his actions was remarkable. He realized that neither his wife nor his employment required access to the aforementioned documents, and the potential for a public disclosure through video footage loomed large. He was unwavering in his resolve to avoid such an outcome. His strategy to persuade Kathleen to sign the divorce papers was all that was needed when I returned. They were engaged in a heated discussion. "Kathleen, simply sign the papers now, and I guarantee that I will facilitate your reunification." That was all he needed to say to begin his persuasion. I will allow you the opportunity to speak with him and attempt to persuade him of your love. You may suggest that he attend therapy. Simply request that he wait, stating that it is the least he can do after 15 years of marriage over one mistake. This is our best chance, he said, appearing sincere. After all, if he had those videos and audio recordings, it would have been detrimental to both of us. I do not want to divorce, Kathleen said, her voice filled with tears. Believe me. It is imperative that this course of action be taken into consideration. It is crucial to prioritize the well-being of the children, as it would be detrimental to their development to lose them. Persuasion from her lover continued, and her eyes welled up with tears once more after a brief period of contemplation. I approached the table, and he signed the papers. I inquired with sadness in my voice, "Have you signed the papers?" She met my gaze and whispered, "Darling, I will do anything you ask, including signing those documents. However, please allow me a week to make any final decisions. May I be permitted to return home for the duration of this week, which marks the end of 15 years of cohabitation? I would like to spend this time with our children." I paused for a moment, weighing her request. Despite her actions, I was willing to give her the opportunity to reconsider. "You will be permitted to stay in the guest bedroom. I cannot allow you to sleep in the same bed as me, but I will allow you to leave with the understanding that you will sign the necessary documents." I proceeded to gather the documents in a folder and stood up, indicating that I was prepared to depart. However, before doing so, I took her hand. She smiled briefly, before realizing that I was removing her wedding rings and leaving mine on the table. I carelessly tossed mine into her glass of wine. Her eyes filled with tears, yet I could not hide a smile, seeing her begin to understand my pain. I then turned to Richard and said, "Now she's yours. Do as you wish, but remember. Richard, you have encroached upon my family, disrupted our marriage, and endangered a great deal. Your destiny is now in my hands. Do not presume to challenge me. You are fortunate that I did not initially carry out my plans. This is not the end." Richard nodded silently as I stood over him, evidently submissive. He was in my hands, and I relished the opportunity to manipulate him as I pleased. However, I chose not to deviate from my initial plan. I am curious as to whether they still desire sexual intercourse after I have departed. I had assumed that I was about to leave when Kathleen suddenly grabbed my hand and pleaded with me, asking if she could come home with me. She stated that she simply wished to be near me, and begged me to allow her to do so. I abruptly removed my hand from hers, as if it were burning me, and replied in a cold and indifferent tone, "Forget it. I don't. I would like to be seen in your company. You are at a business meeting today. Let us meet after you have concluded your business. It is not important when, as long as it is within the next week. I am disgusted by you, and I am ashamed to have ever been your husband. I made a mistake, but I am not sorry." I kept my emotions in check and took pride in I was able to restrain my anger in a manner that would be considered appropriate for a man in my position. Despite his outward appearance, a man must remain human. I gave her a week to consider her actions. The following morning, after she returned home an hour after our conversation, Kathleen seemed to realize that I was not in the mood for a calm dialogue and went to the I proceeded to the guest room, still consumed by a desire for vengeance. I continued in the same vein, greeting her with a cheerful, "Good morning, how are you today?" I inquired, attempting to maintain a neutral tone. However, she visibly recoiled and, averting her gaze from the coffee in front of her, uttered the standard words for such situations, "We need to talk." However, I was unwavering in my stance. "Kathleen, I am aware of the nature of your extramarital relationships. I have discerned the manner in which you have misled me and made disparaging remarks about me during our marriage to him. I have observed your attempts to gain his attention while you have consistently deprived me of such attention." She attempted to justify her actions by stating that she never intended to cause me harm. However, I countered that the issue is not merely infidelity. "Kathleen, the issue is that you selected this course of action and attempted to conceal it by continuing to provide false information. It is disturbing to consider the possibility of other similar instances with other partners. How could you deceive me and resume our relationship as if nothing had occurred? You discussed love, but what is the relevance of love in the context of a broken trust? I had loved you, Kathleen, but the trust is irreparably damaged. I asked myself whether I had ever truly known you. I spoke to her, my voice laden with emotion, and in her tears, I saw the extent of my feelings and the gravity of her actions. There were no apologies, only an admission of guilt. She said, "It's all right. I understand. Furthermore, I am disillusioned with myself." She confessed, admitting her guilt. "I do not believe that you can forgive me, but I do not wish for us to separate. I am prepared to do anything to maintain our relationship. I require professional assistance, and perhaps together we can address my issues. Please remain with me," she implored. I reflected before responding. "Kathleen, you are encouraged to seek support if you feel it would be beneficial. I will be there for you, but I am unable to continue a relationship with someone who was so readily willing to reject me. Your actions have demonstrated your true feelings, and I do not foresee a future together. It is evident that you have missed an opportunity for a positive outcome. I suggest you consider spending a week with our children to gain a different perspective. Regarding how you'll explain your departure, I will maintain dignity and refrain from slanderous remarks in their presence. However, I will be honest about the reasons for the separation. They will remain with me if your behavior is deemed unworthy. I will ensure you have access to the children, but if your behavior does not change, I will have to limit the meetings I have. I have 2 questions for you. Firstly, why did you decide to risk everything? Secondly, was it worth it?" I asked these questions unexpectedly, but Kathleen began to cry and went into the living room. I decided not to bother her anymore. That day, I had an important meeting, and then I contacted Richard to discuss the consequences of his actions at lunch. I offered him a plan. To finally support Kathleen for the next couple of years as a form of compensation, this is the least you can do. I detailed the plan, emphasizing that failure to follow through would result in the loss of employment and the discovery of the truth by Kathleen's wife. Despite my disappointment in Kathleen, I still cared about her and wanted to ensure her well-being. She would be okay. You must take responsibility for your actions. I concluded the conversation with Richard, emphasizing the importance of the consequences of his actions. Richard made payments every month, not forgetting my warning. I began recalling our conversations and Kathleen. She tried to explain her actions, admitting that she had deceived me and that it was in vain. She regretted it, but could not understand why she had done it. Now she was alone, having lost the love that was once hers. I could have completely destroyed her life, but the loss of family and my love seemed punishment enough. She sought answers, but could not explain her actions. She asserted that the incident was not related to our relationship and that she was happy with our life together. However, she claimed that something new and exciting prompted her to cheat. If you were happy, why did you choose such provocative outfits for him? These were not the types of outfits you ever wore for me. Perhaps if the level of effort invested in our relationship is a significant contributing factor to our current situation. Your actions and words indicate that this incident was not premeditated. I am seeking a sincere explanation from you, despite your professed love for me. After the divorce, the children remained with me, along with my former spouse. The wife's lover assisted her in recuperating. I was reluctant for her to reach a nadir because I recognized that individuals err, but it is crucial to comprehend that every action has consequences that can be significantly damaging. I am gratified that I was able to resist emotional influences and make prudent decisions. This account of separation and the subsequent actions of the protagonist illustrates the significance of self-respect, compassion, and the capacity to make challenging decisions in emotionally charged circumstances. It highlights the importance of upholding humanity and support even in moments of disappointment and betrayal.